All right, good afternoon for the second part, everyone. So just as a follow-up, we started the scenario on the basis of 3 phases: readiness, response, and preparedness. And each of the 4 projects are going through what they can do and what their role is in each of the phases. We are halfway through the response phase, and I'm going to leave the floor to Martin for the logistic cluster preparedness and the log.ai platform. And then I will close that part before we move to the lessons learned and preparedness response. Martin, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, go ahead.
Perfect, great. Yeah, welcome back. I try to keep this slide short and more focus on the demo. So as mentioned already, in the readiness phase, we do the same in response, usually through search teams on the ground. And yeah, as the case for Madagascar, where BNGRC is strongly using this, and we already had several emergencies together in a sense. We can basically directly tap into a couple of links. Now here, for the sake of this demonstration, what we would foresee, or where we see an added value is, for example, when talking about customs, this is one of the key questions or requirements that come up every emergency, again, on towards the logistics class. Okay, what is the current status on customs? What are the requirements? Sometimes even simple things like, what is the opening hours of an entry point, a border crossing? What's the current status? Is there a contact number, an email address? What are the current procedures? Now, with ASIREC established, or where ASIREC would be implemented in a country, this would be a really strong link then for us. We would basically focus on, okay, these are the key, whatever, top 3 information that we can directly include in log.ai, and from there then link our users directly to the ASIREC platform. We have, especially for entry points, this is usually one of the most looked at information, as you probably recently have also seen with the Turkey, Syria emergency, where these cross-border operations were of major concern. So we are here also trying to overlap this information. Then storage capacity is always coming as well. Maybe just here a side comment on the logistics cluster mandate. The facilitation of service provision here really comes in terms of, let's say we have organization A in urgent need for storage capacity, and organization B has maybe a warehouse already under operation and some spare capacity to share. And we're trying to, we're basically the platform facilitating this, this matching, so to say. The same then when it comes to stock and stock levels. That is one of the points we're currently working with Stockholm to basically directly integrate this information. So let's say in simple terms, to avoid that a logistician from an organization has to go through 3, 4, 5, 6 or more websites to consume and combine different information components to basically have it all together. And then when it comes about the actual interaction, to be with the subject matter tool. On the road access constraints, that's one of the things where we are also actively participating. So in general, log.ai, but not only, also other IAM tools that we're operating are really focusing on these elements, whereas the cargo movement itself or the stock levels itself, there is established platforms. On the situation and status itself, what we are usually focusing on is if there's ways to directly tap into the source, so to say. So for example, in Turkey, the road authority had already a live situation feed on road status, at least for the primary roads. So great, why having to manually bring that together? And we have this across the board, everything from satellite imagery to aerial assessment, impact assessments. As the situation is very vivid, we try to here avoid these manual steps in between, because what happens in reality very often is one person puts it into an Excel table, sends it around, another person has to take that table and put it into some other tool. And in the case of Madagascar, this already happened through the leadership of BNGRC. And here, for example, BNGRC is collecting through a table road access information since long. And we're basically, or we worked on simply then importing this table on a live basis. So I'm quickly showing how that.
Sorry, Martin, we don't see your screen.
Yeah, I was basically just like talking through the slide. I'm sharing right now. 1 second. So I hope you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay. Looking at the tool right now, as you see, the situation has developed, and this really reflects real scenarios where we could basically map out the situation throughout while basically the cyclone was making landfall. And you see this airport is closed. These are closed. Obviously, this is now for the sake of a simulation. You also can see that a couple of roads have been reported as currently being closed due to the emergency situation. And you also see here the first field reports coming in about roads being passable or not passable, for example, whatever, due to a vehicle. This is authentic imagery, but not for that specific location. What also happened in the past, then, if aerial assessment was taking place, again, real imagery, this can be included directly. What we saw is beyond these maps that very often the raw primary data collected imagery itself is already of great benefit. I mentioned it briefly before. So based on what the logistician or the humanitarians coming, what are they looking for? We try to simplify a bit this vast amount of information by having different modules. So for example, I had it before, logistics capacity mapping. So if someone is interested in a specific area or in physical access constraints, maybe wants to see, I don't know, the airports together with that, and maybe the ports, could now say, okay, this is relevant for us. I want to have it on a map and export it, and exported product, that's the one I clicked on before, then can be, for example, made to whatever, print, plot, and use offline. We focus usually here on the infrastructure, not the cargo content, but just to showcase how that could then look like in case of ESUPS being linked. So we here basically use the data dump that Florent shared beforehand. And then you could, again, this is not how the final interface would look like, but you could then, for example, say, okay, we see whatever in which area, in which, in that case, admin 1 region, stock levels are currently in case, or zooming in what is in there, how many kitchen, etc. In general, we try to focus on user-friendly interfaces. So this here would be the raw data, not as we want to show it then. And that maybe as a general remark, that there's like 2 main challenges that we see. One is to really provide access to this information, combining these sources, but the other challenge is also, okay, what is relevant? An airport alone has over 60 different attributes describing it, from whatever runway length to opening hours of the customs bureau. And the question is always, okay, what is relevant? How can we avoid just overloading this page, overloading information, and therefore these new use cases like here with ESUPS would then basically be subject to a review and understanding, okay, what can we in a preliminary basis show before then? Let's assume someone is, okay, great, here, whatever, 25, 26 buckets, and then be guided to the ESUPS page, to the Stockholm page directly. But this for now is just a demonstration. Just on the updates themselves, I wanted to quickly show this as well. So for example, let's assume there is information coming in. The editor interface would also see whatever latest reports here on flooding, on roads. I don't know, what do we have here? That one, for example. So that was an authentic report made by a field colleague, and basically on a different location, obviously at a different time. And basically this then can be merged together, and let's assume the officer would define, okay, based on our intel, based on our verification, this access route here at the moment is only passable to a limited extent. And just to show what real time then actually means is you can then really here, mark that road segment and say, okay, this N6, we want the entire road And there's different ways to do it. I'm not just using the paint tool. I want to mark this entire road segment as limited access, so whatever this is passable with restrictions at the moment only for cars. You can also make it limited to humanitarian, whatever it might be, and then commit it. And from that moment on, it's basically updated, published, the status is changed. And then within maximum 1 minute, that's the update refresh frequency. You see, then this is done. This really allows us to minimize the entire lead time from information coming in to being available to the community to, literally minutes. The longest process it takes now is the information management officer, be it a colleague from BNGRC sitting in Madagascar, be it a colleague on international level providing information. The validation process itself. So at what degree, to what extent am I sure enough to define this is sufficiently verified to be shared publicly? Of course, obviously, we have then all the classical IM markers from reliability, source definition, where it's coming from, imagery behind it. But basically, this was just to show how fast this system then can actually provide the updates. Or here, for example, the airport, we then can directly link in any other information coming in from other sources. But for us, the focus here is really, we want to make sure that this is lightweight, easy to access, and providing as fast as possible while being as reliable as possible information to the humanitarian community. Yeah, then maybe in light of the current time, I would just have a quick look to show the map product that we generated. So at the moment, we're improving this mapping tool as well to basically meet a couple of user requests who said, okay, that's the way we want to have these maps, because very often internet connectivity might be here and there, but we want to have these really to print and then work on paper or continue working offline. And then, maybe a last point to have mentioned as well on the data. We focused for now on the map interface, but of course, this is then an end-to-end interface that also allows for tabular formats or dashboards, analytics, whatever else you want. But for us, really, the focus here is to understand, well, what are the key pressing information needs, and to optimize the interface for this. But just to reiterate, our key users are operational logisticians with limited time and a clear, let's say, use case, either coming to send in cargo, to transport cargo, to store it, or here with the new use case to maybe see also what stock levels at the moment for specific relief items are already available. Yeah, I would hand over back to you, Florent. In case there's questions, I'm still in the chat, but maybe not to take too much time for the rest. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Very interesting. Just wanted to add a couple of things on that before moving to what the Stockholm part would be in this response phase. I just want to mention that the log.ai platform is publicly accessible, so all the information there, as mentioned, Martin, need to be somehow verified, etc., before they're going public. The Stockholm platform is not, so you need to be registered because we have personal information. We are abiding to the GDPR data protection framework. And when we plan to share those information, like Martin showed in the log.ai platform, the information will be aggregated. So there will be no display about who's owning it, what are the exact GPS location. It will be a grouping of information. As Martin showed you on the map, you will have a grouping saying the community in this province has 3,000 blankets, but they will do no specifics. In order to access the specific, you will need to log into the Stockholm platform, where if you are a registered user, you will access the detail, etc. So we are taking the data question seriously. I also wanted to, sorry, what's the question?
No, it's a really good point. Maybe I would just also outline on this. In general, when it comes to log.ie, we have the same policy. So as you said, we focus on aggregated information, and we have several data protection layers or firewalls, however you want to call it, in between. So if someone, for example, would provide information, if we would decide that this is relevant and verified for public use, all the personal information is stripped off and or aggregated according to OSHA and GDPR standards. So this is a very good point. Thank you, Florent.
Thanks, Martin. So just in regards to the Stockholm platform, as I said before, Stockholm is not designed as a response mechanism. So during this phase, there's very little you can do. But I just want to show you, you can see on the screen. So I'm logged in at the moment as one of the Madagascar department. And if I go into the facilities, I'm just going to show you what's the process to update a stock. You imagine you have been dispatching, you're getting a replenishment, you update your stock. So here you'll find your facilities. And if you pick one like this one, you can then edit the facility. You can pick up one of your items, you edit, and you simply change the quantity from 45 to whatever that is, 140, and you save. And that's it. That's how you update your data. So we've tried to make it as simple as possible. The idea is that the ownership of the platform is passed down. So we give access to the global coordinator logistic for an organization like IOM. I think they're sitting right here. And then Taylor, who is in charge at global level, will pass over to the coordinator of the Americas or Asia, Pacific or Africa. And the person in charge of Asia Pacific will pass over to Asia and Pacific, etc., until you get down to the facility manager. So each facility manager will update their facility and their list of items. And then all that combined will make the person at the top and all the people in between to have an overview of the stock they're in charge of. So we try to keep that as simple as possible. One more thing, on the we've passed that. So basically on the Stockholm platform during the response phase, besides dispatching, replenishing and updating your stock, that's about all you can do because the whole platform functions on the fact that you have up-to-date data to do an analysis, and until the data are not up-to-date, there's not much you can do. Just mention as well, as part of this scenario, while we are presenting those 4 tools and how we can support each other and interact and complement each other, we keep very much aware in this scenario there are other players and other factors that are not taken into consideration. We know there's a private sector, and we know there's long-term supplier agreement. We know that there's other factors that would also have an impact about how much stock is required. So it's not only about what is required in Stockholm, and then we would go to the international Humanitarian city. There's a whole private sector capacity in country and in the neighboring countries that are not taken into consideration in this scenario. Doesn't mean we don't. It means that at the moment, they are not sitting with us to be part of this exercise. But definitely, we have engaged processes to make sure we can connect with the CBI initiative or others to also bring information about the private sector to give the NDMO or decision maker an even more exhaustive picture about the capacity there. Just wanted to mention that. So we're going to move into the last phase of the exercise, which is the response is over. We're going through the lessons learned, and now we're taking that as a way to prepare for the next wave. And we're going to start this time with our colleague from Azirec. Is it John again? So yep. John, over to you.
Thank you very much. So regarding the preparedness phase, like Florent said at the beginning, it's the word preparedness also can refer to the readiness phase, but here we're talking about, in this particular case, we're talking about the end of the emergency and to be ready for the future after that. So in terms of the processes that have been identified in terms of, as far as Azirec is concerned, there's the recording the end of the emergency procedure. So the emergency procedure that is in the system will need to be declared as finished. Note that it also has the provision for not just terminating the procedure, but also extending the procedure if necessary. If the procedure is extended, then that means that the relief items and the operators will then therefore be allowed to continue to benefit from the facilitated procedures for the relief items defined. That, of course, is a decision that will be made based on what is happening in country. We mentioned before the whole aspect of communication, notification to the various actors in the border management and in this whole process, and there needs to be a proper indication and notification that the emergency procedure has been terminated. The difficulty at that point for customs and other agencies is that if goods are still being tried to be brought in or as relief items, then they will no longer benefit from the facilitated procedures, and that can be quite a bottleneck at that point. So it needs to be very carefully coordinated, that the termination, people are aware of the termination, and if they do bring in goods after that, it will be subject to the regular taxation and other normal, let's say, normal procedures outside of an emergency phase. In terms of preparing for the future, there will need to be performance of post-clearance audit and assessment of humanitarian operators' compliance. In other words, to look at, there's several components here. One is the fact that the simplified declarations, some of them will need to be turned into consolidated declarations for the customs needs, and there also has to be some analysis to look at the operators, the goods that have been brought in, compliance of the operators, also the different consignments that have gone in for physical inspection and documentary check. Look for trends that might help identify goods that shouldn't have been coming in within this process in order to better prepare for future procedures. The NDMO and or customs will continue to update the list of priority items and eligible organizations as required, as this is a long-living dynamic process that continues basically forever. If we could move to the next slide before I go into the live aspect. Thank you. Looking at data, so basically what was said beforehand, all this is basically all data that needs to be managed. And ASIREC is part of that, along with the other systems that have been mentioned here today. So it's very important to report relief items. Obviously, thousands and thousands of kilos of packages and all kinds of stuff have come into the country, and now we have to look at what were the statistics that can be generated from the system, and how this can be used in other systems. One, transferred to other systems, and two, how it can be used for future reference. If I can just show you a couple of features from the system, I will share my screen. So here we come back to the emergency procedure. At this point, the relevant organization will need to either extend or terminate the emergency procedure. If we look at the actual document itself, the electronic document, there's an end date here. The termination process will simply just turn this document into a terminated status. However, if you extend, you therefore modify this end date accordingly, and that will extend the period to a much longer phase. What needs to be remembered at this point is that if you do extend, then the system will therefore apply this to the simplified declarations coming in and continue to accept certain items for certain operators under certain procedures. And if it's terminated, then of course that will no longer apply, and this is automatically done in the system. And one final point here is to mention, we mentioned numbers and analysis post-emergency. Here we can do a summary of what's going on during an actual emergency. This is the one for Madagascar. If we click on this button here, we get a bar charts of the different items that have been imported. So by hovering the mouse over each bar, we can see not only the description of the HS code, which is at the bottom, and its general information, but also what is remaining, how much is remaining of what is allowed, how much has been imported, how much is on the way, and this we have for each element. And of course, this is based on the fact that things have been declared in simplified declarations during the emergency process, and we can then therefore very easily extract this information and do a summary of the relief items for one particular emergency. And then those numbers can be very useful, not only for other systems, but for the rest of the community to be able to analyze what is left or what has been used and what is left and what can be done in the future. So I will hand back now to Florent, and that ends this part of the ASIREC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that. It's very clear, I think. So as part of this last phase of the exercise, I'm handing back over to Martin to show us how the log.ai platform can be used in this phase. And then after that, I think it's going to be Giuseppe who takes over. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, so for the preparedness phase, basically the tool emerged from a preparedness project. And thanks to our donors, we were able basically here, beside providing a tool to preparedness countries where we're working in as the logistics cluster, to also really bring this tool on a let's say, operational level to be used in international emergencies. And coming back to preparedness for us, what we see most, let's say, the key challenge aside of how making tools talk to each other and what common data standards we can achieve and common operational data sets, the key challenge is really this is only as effective as it is used and useful. So for us in particular, and maybe Colonel Fall wants to also add to that, the biggest challenge is how can we really effectively support national stakeholders? Like, it looks nice, it is shiny, and everything is great in terms of showcasing what it could do. But the question is really, how can we get to that point that national stakeholders can really effectively make use of it? And we see very often this is more the surroundings around it. How does it fit in an information process on the ground? How can stakeholders then access it? How can we ensure long-term sustainability? Trainings, introductions, learning from national stakeholders, how their information framework looks like, and how this can be embedded. That's why also log.ai is built as a building block system. So for us, the preparedness phase is really, let's say, the homework phase, so to say. We could technically switch on any emergency page within minutes. Our servers run these data sets on a global level, and they, like with OpenStreetMap and other big data providers, we have these synchronization routines. But at the same time, let's say the really relevant information, the situational information, that is very often out there, and it just takes a long time, and until it's available to the community. And here it is really about how can we improve this process? How can we support national stakeholders in utilizing these systems, having access to it? And yeah, very, very frank, quite often these are, how shall I say, like things that are not necessarily related to the technology, but more, do the people have access? Is everyone trained? How do we do rotations, language barriers, auto-translation I haven't mentioned before, happening in the background. And for us, these are the key lessons. And sometimes it's simple things like whatever, there's an Excel file shared around, but it's not machine readable. So maybe with some minor tweaks of the format, it can become machine readable. And then we can really turn a process that takes hours to update into minutes or seconds. And for us, that is mainly what happens throughout the preparedness phase. What we aim for and hope for is that in future, we have a better use of former emergencies. So for example, taking these tropical cyclones, and we really on a technical level can say, okay, this forecast looks very much like whatever cyclone 5 years ago, and that was the impact. So to overlay learnings and findings and scenarios from former emergencies. But to be frank, we're not there yet. We have the data, but we're not in the position and don't have the resources to bring that forward at the pace we would like to. And the integration at national level capacity strengthening activities, that is the key challenge. As long as it's not driven by national stakeholders and owned by national stakeholders, it very often risks just to be yet another tool. And as here the colleagues surely have to share the same about this process. It is long-term, it requires a lot of consultation. and it should be led by national government. So as we have here Colonel Fall, I don't know if you want to maybe share a bit of experience with LogAI in the past on that, because for us, this is the key driver in the preparedness phase. What do we have to have in place around it, from data sharing, over agreements, our access to our training, capacity strengthening, implementing it, embedding it, adapting it to national requirements. Yeah, that's where we are basically learning from the national stakeholders.
Ranel, I leave the floor to you if you want to respond to that.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin, for giving me the floor. Thank you, Florent. In fact, LogAI, our experience is quite positive, and even we've been very proactive in the process of implementing LogAI here in Madagascar. Because at the very beginning, at the very early phase of the project, we had a version of a brand new version of LogAI at that time, and starting from I think it was around 2017, 2019, and after the lesson learned of cyclonic season, during which we have utilized LogAI, we have given a kind of inputs and additional, let's say, lesson learned from the use of it, and then the global logistic cluster kindly updated also LogAI for the use of the NDMO. At that time, we were already involved in the way of looking for baseline, all the data that might be available and might be useful for the use of this LogAI system. And now we are on the process to formalize with the Ministry of Public Work, for example, to have a kind of database of roads here in Madagascar, so that we can easily update them during the disaster management that might happen here in Madagascar. This is one of the lessons learned, though, that we are on the process now to do the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, for the targeted ministry, the owner of data useful for the LogAI. The second one might be highlighted. The second thing that might be highlighted is now the what we call point kilometric. So it is a mark that is all along the road, national road, to say that we are now at kilometer number 1, kilometer number 2, and from the point A, the departure to the very end of this national road, there is every kilometers what we call point kilometric. So it is in the field. Now, one of the lessons learned that we have also see by the use of the difference between what is really in the field and then the database on the use of LogAI. And last year we have already say those kind of lessons learned to the global logistic cluster, and they kindly also support us to find solution in those kind of very pragmatic problem that we face on the use of the LOGAI. But those pragmatic problem leads to pragmatic also solution. So we really are very thankful for this good collaboration with Global Logistic Cluster on the use of LOGAI at this page. And we are very exciting to move forward for the next step. And maybe at the very end of this presentation, really, I would like to advocate, to do an advocacy, if it's possible, really, for us to move forward. And as the colleague asked a question at the chat, here in Madagascar, the BNGSA is really engaged to really lead those kind of projects, which is very useful for us, and we think that that can bring very huge added value for the way we manage disaster, and especially the aspect of relief emergency systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel, for this feedback. I will now leave the floor to our colleague from the International City, Mr. Giuseppe Saba will take over for this last phase, and then I will close that part about Stockholm after that. Giuseppe.
Thank you, Flora. Well, let me take my view on the lessons learned. First of all, what we just proved in the past couple of hours, more or less, is that digitalization can have somehow a positive impact on the humanitarian action. There is no doubt about this. But simultaneously, what we learned is that we cannot continue to keep, important and relevant tools, such as the Stockholm one, or the International Humanitarian City Logistics Data Bank, or the ASIRAC, just into silos, including, of course, the logistics clusters. So we need to start in connecting them. There is no doubt. That is the other lessons learned that I have from the past couple of hours. The other part is the fact that the presence of the NDMO is not an option, it's a must. Whenever we want to discuss about preparedness, if we want to be really ready in the best way for responding to an emergency, we need to involve the NDMOs, the NDMAs. And if I may, because the idea started with Flora on this involvement of the NDMOs, I believe that next year we should start in bringing into the table also the regional entities. I'm referring to ECHO, I'm referring to AHA Center of ASEAN, I'm referring to ECOWAS, and so on. They must be part of this kind of exercise. And whenever we talk about the Humanitarian Logistics Data Bank, when we talk about Stockholm, we are still talking about information sharing. If today I have the luxury of showing you the Humanitarian Logistics Data Bank in Dubai, is because all the head of agencies, starting from the Director General of WHO, passing through the Executive Director of WFP, and so on, all of them agreed and signed a letter of intent in order to share this kind of information, including the Secretary General of IFRC, and so on. So means that there is a clear desire of sharing the information. And this is something that is not absolutely irrelevant. To get an idea that is my personal opinion again, if it's true that legally speaking, this information is in the ownership of the various stock owners, morally speaking, this is property of those countries that risk to be affected by natural disasters or complex emergencies. That is the reason why I will insist that they must be on board, especially if we want to talk about preparedness on national level and the local community. Those are not secret, absolutely. They are the ones who really are going to save life. We are coming a little bit from a few thousand kilometers far, so this we can complement their own efforts. I have a couple of questions. The simulation was clearly how to fill the gaps that were identified by looking into the Stockholm, okay. And we started in saying, okay, we should move from the closest humanitarian hub and so on, which is perfectly true. But then we have to ask ourselves if really our NDMO is really well satisfied, really if received what was expected, if those relief items are sustainable. So we have to start in thinking about this. If really for serving Madagascar, we went into Dubai or China instead of to serve Madagascar from Nairobi, because as has been underlined, we risk to increase our carbon emission, but the same is going to happen even for the replenishment. Did we apply, for example, options of loan and borrowing items among agencies? This morning, somebody was asking about this process and how, let me say, to get over the identification of the stock, the marking, and so on and so on. All of those aspects continue to be, let me say, in front of us, and we need to take care about them. We are approaching COP28. And again, also there is no doubt that whatever we used to call them natural disasters are mainly due to climate change, let's just be honest. And also there, how we can prepare ourselves in order to be, let me say, ready for this, for responding to this increase of emergencies due to natural disasters. Here we are talking about digitalization and use of artificial intelligence. Again, the artificial intelligence, I'm not going to enter into this topic because there is a colleague and friend that is supporting IHC on this and is going to explain to us much better than what I can do. But for sure, for us, it's extremely important to understand if across those 11 humanitarian hubs, which Jad was mentioning before, we are keeping the proper level of humanitarian stocks. This is where the artificial intelligence can help us. Predicting, this is another area where the artificial intelligence can help us. And next step, most probably, is also to talk about procurement. Do we should continue to do procurement in the traditional manner, or we should start thinking about e-commerce, let me say, the electronic procurement that we can do in different manner? Do we continue to talk about standards of relief items, or is much better to start in thinking about regional exigencies and so on? This is kind of reflection. Sorry, I used to call them lessons learned, but this was a simulation. But this is something that I would like to continue to discuss with my colleagues. We started even recently in Dubai. We will continue to start in the next few days, but we would like to be in COP28 with clear, let me say, actions. We don't want absolutely to enter into COP28 with blah, 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 but let's shift from words into action. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those words, Giuseppe, and then we'll come back on that in the closing remarks. I just wanted to keep the floor to show you what Stockholm is actually really built for as part of this preparedness phase. So you see on the screen, that's the Stockholm platform. You have in this section the stock mapping, which is what I showed you before, where you can see what stock exists by doing different part of selection. You have the national disaster analysis, which is I showed you before. For each country, we've analyzed 40s of disaster, or we are in the process of going through the list of countries. My colleagues over there are working on that. The approach we have about this project is to give a capacity to national actors in country to define a pre-positioning strategy of a collective nature. Giuseppe mentioned that very well. We need to start stepping out of our silo approach. So I'm doing my prepositionment because this is the way I've been doing it for 20 years and I have no idea what the others are doing, and we duplicate everything. We have no stock rotation, we have gaps, and we keep going as if it didn't matter. It does, because the resources are lesser and lesser, and unless we change the way we've been doing things, we will not be able to face what's coming with climate change, etc. So our approach is this one. We look at the stock available in country, which is the stock mapping you see on the screen. We look at the last 40 years of disaster into a country to have an idea about what the country is subject to in terms of disaster. There are different approaches. We've been mentioning before that some other initiatives are or will look into IA and forecasting rather than looking at what happened in the past. I think those two approaches are not antinomics, they are complementary. So we need to keep working on this together. What we've been doing is that with those two sets of information, the existing stock and the existing information on past disaster, we've been looking at a mathematical model developed by Penn State University and the MIT. And on the back of this model, which by definition is imperfect because it's a mathematical model, but we can provide some overview of the stock. So I'm looking at what we've been doing for Madagascar. And we've collected the stock from basically everybody with the support of the Lock Cluster Preparedness Initiative over there and the BNGRC, of course. The stock collected in country, as you can see here, the stock available in country allows Madagascar, if they were in a closed box with no external support to come, to support around 40% of the disaster affecting them, with an average disaster of 15,000 people. Of course, it's an average. If you look at Tana, the capital, you would have a higher capacity because there's more stock, because people keep more stock in the capital, and you would have a lower number in the provinces where there's less stock. But on average across the country can support disaster of around 15,000 people by themselves. Okay, keep this figure in mind because we're going to come back to that in a minute. Now, that gives you a capacity collectively to know where you stand, okay? Which is probably better than what you had before, where everybody was doing their stuff in their corner. You can do the same evaluation per item. So let's look at the kitchen set. On a kitchen set capacity, your capacity in country is to support around half the disaster affecting the country. And again, we'll come back on this number in a minute to see how you can take that information and from there define a target you want to reach collectively. The second table underneath here is an evaluation of the location. So the first one is an evaluation of your quantities, and the second one is an evaluation of your location. So as you can see, you have a bit of room to improve, but the stocks of kitchen set currently in country are pretty much in the right location. Okay, and you have a third part here, which is giving you an idea of where you need to put your priorities. So you are the BNGRC, you bring your partners around the different clusters, shelter, wash, etc., and you want to know where should you start putting an effort to start saving cost and money. That's the same thing, time and money. So you can see in the three provinces, Sabah, Diana, and Sofia, as long as you're going to start moving items here or from here, depending on the recommendation provided by the system, that's where you're going to start saving the most quickly and efficiently time and money. Okay, so that gives you an overview. As you can see, this tab is called National Level Overview. Give you an overview of where you stand collectively. Now, from that base on, you can start working on a collective strategy. And to do that, I'm going to show you how you can take this same approach at per item level. So we're going to take I'm going to stay in Madagascar, that's okay. So we keep the same item to have an idea. You look at your kitchen set. You look at the province of Mahanjaga we are looking at before. And now you see you were at 49%, and you say, okay, how can we collectively reach 75% of disaster in this province with our kitchen set? Okay, you have your shelter cluster sitting here. And here is what information you get. The system will tell you that ideally, looking at the last 40 years of disaster, the level of stock of kitchen set in Mahanjaga should be close to 700. Okay, currently you collectively have around 150, you're missing 540. So we mentioned before, there's lots of other capacity to complement that. Before going to the International Humanitarian City or other partner, UNHCR, you can definitely look at your local markets and your local suppliers, okay? So that's one way. The other way you can look at is if you have other warehouses into the country, again, collectively, that are overstocked. And it's very interesting because you do. So in this warehouse in the province of Morondava, the overall stock, sorry for the work in progress, that's something we need to clean, but the stock that should be kept in Morondava is around 110. The reason you have 2,200 because nobody talked to each other. So you have a lot more kitchen sets there than you would actually need to support 40 years of disaster. So instead of bringing some more stock or going to the local market or put a truck on the road or whatever, those kind of information can be used to reallocate the stock to be collectively more prepared to respond to more disaster for lesser cost and a lesser time. Okay, so take those items from here, move them there, get to 700, reduce your overall quantity there, and you will have warehouses, facilities that are much more balanced. Okay, of course, you can see that there's other facilities that are in larger need, so you wouldn't have enough stock into the country, but it gives you an idea where you stand. In Madagascar, we only started the select percentage from 75%, but in Honduras and the other country, we started at 50 because sometimes it makes quite a big gap. The other information that you can get from that is that should the recommendation be implemented collectively, the potential time saving is around 8%, which is around 1 day per week in terms of response. The potential cost saving is around 30%, which, as you can see, start being quite significant. We are part of the next step. We are looking at developing an extra information here, which will be potential carbon emission saved by avoiding more plane and trucks and taking the one into consideration for the relocation of the goods in country. So what we're trying to demonstrate here is that sometimes we just don't need more. We just need to do differently with what we already have. And more is not always a solution. I also want to mention that to resonate with what was mentioned by Giuseppe, and we call it a colleague we work with the UNHRD. At the moment, there's no pre-positioning strategy at national level, and Colonel can probably confirm that after that, but it's very difficult for anybody to know what the other are doing, and therefore to put a strategy in place considering what everybody else is doing. We don't have national prepositioning strategies in place. They don't have regional prepositioning strategies either. Okay, so the problem we face at national level are the same that they're facing at regional level. Hence, the reason also to start working together on those matters, because they can't be disconnected. What happened at regional level should be complementing what's needed at national level and vice versa. So we need to have those relationships established. I will stop here because I think that you can log on the ESUPS platform and find plenty of information, and there's many more things to show you, but that's not the point of this exercise. I will then move to the last part, which are the next step and the conclusion. So for Stockholm and the ESUPS project, there's a couple of things I want to mention. First, we have a sponsor by Gurobi, which is also supporting other platforms like the Logai platform and others. So in terms of integrating information, it will be actually make things much easier. And the project, for people who don't know, is hosted by Weltungerhilfe, and we have the director of the Humanitarian Directorate here, Norman, with us. The next step for the project, as we started to grow, I think if we look at the overall dashboard of the platform, you will see this right now live. We have, as of today, we have 220 users and we have 110 agencies on board, and I think we are present in around 40 countries. So some countries are much more advanced with many information. Some we just have one organization, but that's the idea. We try to roll the snowball and to bring more partners on board. So that's the reason also to engage with partners. That's what we're going to try to do. Encourage and support partners, government, INGO, NGO, UN, Red Cross to join this initiative. We're going to progress integration of the private sector. We've referred to that a few times. We know it's a very important element and it's a growing one. We need to find ways to include them into the platform, again, on the same ideas as the NDMO, when they try to have another view of the capacities with the stock from the humanitarian partner, with the stock from the regional actors. They also have another view of the private sector capabilities. So that's one thing we're going to start engaging with. We're going to finalize and multiply the APIs, the technical connection between the platform. So the ISC, the UNHRD, the LogAI platform, but also with existing warehouse management systems so that when you update your stock with what you receive yourself, you don't have to do double handling with also updating Stockholm. So anyone interested with the warehouse management system, we're happy to engage on that process. Finalize the development of a ponderation table, which is interesting. It's actually a system that was existing in Madagascar. And when I presented the Stockholm project there, they realized they had this in place. And we've agreed with the colonels that we would be allowed to steal it from them. So the idea is to develop a set of variables which will be informed, contextualized by the country. So something like the road access, which we discussed with LogAI, that will influence how you should preposition stock. If you have cash programming in country, that should influence how much stock you keep into the country. So all this information that we cannot build in at the global level, there will be an extra page on the platform, and people at national level will be able to inform that. Those extra variables will then fine-tune the overall finding we have with that on a contextualized basis, which will be different in Madagascar, in Honduras, in Fiji, and in other places. And finally, because that already started with the number of users, we started to collect feedback of people, of what they like, what they don't like, what are the information they would like to have access or the functionality. We not promise that we will develop all of them, but if we start having an aggregation of the same idea going forward, like we recently did from many of the Pacific Islander nations, we developed the functionality of a bulk upload, for instance, which allows you to put everything into Excel and then feed that into the platform, and then that's it, your stock is there. So there's quite a lot going, and of course, that will be along with the partnership with Direct, with the International City, with LogAI, and we're trying to make sure that we don't stay in our own silo and we keep working along with what the others are doing. So that's for Stockholm. ISC, next steps.
I will summarize 3-4 lines maximum. I would like to be back next year and present all together. Okay, really integrated tools. That is my next step, first one. I would love to see next year all primary actors around the table again, but including the regional ones, as I said before. And I hope to get the International Humanitarian City Logistics Data Bank expanded into other countries. Trust me, as mentioned by Jihad, is detecting customs transactions, means that we are dealing directly with the customs. We succeeded in Dubai, we succeeded with the government of Panama, we succeeded with the government of Italy. We are succeeding now with the government of Jordan and so on, but I hope that when we will come next year, we are going to bring you actions more than additional blah, blah. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think we have the colleague from the artificial intelligence to ready online, but I think we just finished with Azirek and Logai on the next step, and then we'll move to that before the last few slides. So Azirek, on your next steps. John, sorry, John, you're online.
Yes, I am. Could we just change the slide, perhaps? Yes. Excuse me. Yes, so very briefly then. So the next steps, actually now, we have a project in Vanuatu to implement Azirek, which is ongoing. There have been a few delays due to the hacking incident around December and due to a natural disaster also in February this year. However, there was a relaunch last week, so we are ready to start our activities. This will hopefully be the at least to a certain degree, the blueprint to be able to continue in other countries, or at least to be able to be in a better position to actually get further implementations on board. And this is actually the second point, is to continue the discussions with other interested NDMOs and other countries who are subject to such unfortunate disasters, to be able to implement Azirek there as well. So as mentioned by our colleague Giuseppe, hopefully next year we'll talk about something that's actually been done, at least in Vanuatu. The third point has obviously been mentioned by all the partners, is that we need to find a way to establish interconnectivity between the systems. The systems are all very good, but they do need to talk to each other in a manner, and this is probably the next step, because first these systems have been developed, tested, hopefully being used as well. And now they need to go a step further and be interconnected in the right way at the right time, and to the benefit of those who are going to use them. Coming back to the Pacific region, we have a UNDA, that's United Nations Development Account regional project, where we bid for, and we were successful actually in getting a project for, if I can describe it that way, the spreading of the word, as it were, in the Pacific region, for regional seminars, for training material based on the Vanuatu experience, to be able to communicate that and use the experience for 13 other islands in the Pacific region. And those seminars and that material will be done in 2024 and 2025 as part of the UNDA cycle, which has a very concrete timetable set up for 2 years, actually 3, including the preparation this year. So these are the next steps that we have to get on with, and yes, there's work that needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. And that you can see within Stockholm, we have actually a lot of information of stock in Pacific. So happy to work with you on that if needed.
Agreed.
Martin, I leave the floor to you, and then we'll go with the quick presentation from the AI partner before closing the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. So on Logai, we had mentioned already before, our main focus at the moment is this linkage, as mentioned before here by the colleagues. And for us, this is extremely fascinating, because there is established tools that are very powerful in their specific use case. And we are looking into ways how to just integrate these into the common operational picture. We were already with Stockholm underway on the API development, and are very much looking forward to have this done. Azirek for us is a fascinating tool since long. As we are an operational tool unit, whenever there's a large-scale emergency, we have to basically attend to the emergency, and that might affect the timeline, but very much looking forward to also here follow up bilaterally and see there's a lot of very interesting, or let's say relevant and useful data beyond the custom purpose as well. Like the moment Azirek has information about entry points, this information itself is already of very much use for us, so very much looking forward to it. The same with IHC. This is also a huge endeavor, and we are super curious to see how we can here establish a data link. That's our homework, so to say. And secondly, we are focusing on the improvements, what is, let's say, called usability, to make it even easier for users to fast access the information they're looking for. Our target audience, obviously, the logisticians in the humanitarian community. And that also goes along with better training and advocacy documentation. As this tool is developing that fast, it's hard to really maintain a good instruction training package. And we will, with even further focus, continue with the national stakeholders, from which we learned the most, to be honest, in terms of functionality and what is really useful. And yeah, so I totally agree with the colleagues here. As also Giuseppe mentioned, if we come back next year, to come back with results and having basically these ideas here to show in reality. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Martin, for that. So I will leave the floor to our colleague from the AI. I think they have a quick presentation. But in the same time, if anyone's willing to scan that QR code and start putting together a quick evaluation survey on the session, that would be very helpful. Do we have our colleague from nybl in line, please?
Yes, I'm here, Franz. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to just start out by saying, a really big thank you to Giuseppe and Jihad both for the invitation to be here. Listening to the colleagues speaking so far, I think I have been filled with opportunity. What we've seen so far, the efforts that have been taken in terms of digitalization of the humanitarian response is massive. And I hope, if I'm okay to share my screen now, the QR may disappear.
Let's go ahead.
Great. So I'm keen to show what we've done so far with IHC. A lot of the questions that have been asked may be answered here to a degree. So nybl is an AI company you've mentioned a few times. We work in terms of science-based, data science-driven artificial intelligence. So a lot of this we don't need to go into. Obviously, we speak here on this slide about the need to be prepared. You have already spoken about this. You are the people who have kind of fed this kind of requirement to us. So understanding the awareness, education, preparedness, predicting, and having systems that can warn people to reduce the impact of natural disasters. And Giuseppe, I love, the frank way to say these are climate related. So it's very important that we understand what they are. We understand our role as an AI company is to basically support the humanitarian actors to build tools which are valuable. Data science is an amazing technology, artificial intelligence, amazing technology, and we've built a lot of really exciting technologies, but without input from IHC and the stakeholders, we wouldn't have been able to produce anything of value. And we've heard that repeated throughout the session today. So without getting stuck on this slide, this project was fueled by IHC's data. We had historical data. It's important to mention that because as we start to feed more data into the system, the predictions will become more and more accurate, and they will become more and more valuable. So what we've been able to demonstrate is development of AI models within the context that you have been speaking about, which is a cyclone event in Madagascar. So what we did, we took essentially the last 5 years of IHC data, which was shared, and we are now able to predict the total worth or the value in USD of aid, the total weight of that aid, and the total number of items which we predict will be required for any region, all the way down to a country. Now, it's worth pointing out that this doesn't apply to any type of calamity. We've been focused on cyclones, and as you've already mentioned as a group, the ability to predict this in terms of seasonality is becoming less. It's becoming less possible to predict this, but via the data science, we have very, very high accuracy in terms of what we've been able to demonstrate. So looking at specific subregions breaking it down to specific months and down to specific product clusters. What we've been able to do is also then describe a proportionate projection. So we're able to estimate the value of aid, its weight, and the number of items for each group of products under a specific product cluster. Obviously, the long-term requirement here is to be able to compare what we forecast in terms of demand with what we've seen in the existing systems that show current stock, so that we can find those gaps and then act in enough time to be able to reduce suffering. So this is one of the areas where we decided to investigate further. We saw strong correlation. The relationships here between the number of subregions and aggregated aid value was clear against the value versus the months, and also the value versus subregions. So again, this didn't give us insight, but it gave us a good indication as to where we should start focusing. Many times we went back and forth with the stakeholders, and they said, this is not really a useful insight. So there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done with the stakeholders so that we can make sure that what we're developing is truly valuable to the people on the ground. So again, big thanks to IHC, Jihad, and the team there. What we did is basically take the data on the left-hand side of this. We took the calamity types, the subregions, the month, and the product clusters from every single waybill that we were able to then feed into the machine learning models that nybl has, proprietary models. And we were able to develop 3 ML models. And as we targeted, we are able to predict the total value, total weight, and the number of each type of item. Again, this is valuable for many different reasons, but we've looked at it within a very specific context. To give you an idea in terms of the accuracy of the models, the scores in terms of R² is 0.9 when we look at weight and value, and 0.8 in terms of quantity. So there's a little bit of larger variance in terms of the actual number of items. But when you look at the predicted value versus the actual value in terms of dollars for the aid, this is within a specific region, broken down into product cluster in this table. You can see that the predicted values are pretty close. Now, given that we have a limited amount of data coming in at this point, there is a tendency for ML models to overfit, and this will improve over time as we're able to give additional data into the system. And of course, there is a bias towards where the regional hubs are. This is the data from the UAE hub. So as we integrate further data sets, we can be more and more confident in terms of the projections. So taking the predicted values, so when we look at the actual dollar value, we look at the predicted weight and the predicted numbers of items, we're able to then think many different ways on how we can use that data when we predict the emergence of an emergency. So looking at the context of the scenario which was given, we went down into the Eastern Africa, and we looked specifically, for example, at health in terms of the product cluster. So we made a projection in terms of the dollar value of that aid, and that can then be broken down further into medical items, pharmaceutical, safety, and security. And these projections are based on those same models. Of course, the same is done for the weight. We break it down into where we believe that will go. And again, in terms of the items, the number of them, this is the one with the lowest accuracy, but still 80% is pretty significant when you look at the ability to be ready in advance. Again, the idea is to then compare what we have in stock currently versus what you predict will be needed. So of course, when you look at the IHC stock and you compare that to a calamity that we've seen, the stock doesn't, there is no gap, there is no shortage at this point, because the particular calamity that we looked at was very small. That said, when you integrate further data sets and you aggregate more and more product items, you will start to see that percentages of sub-hubs or hubs across the world, you will start to see that there is a shortage. And this is where you have the opportunity to act in advance. When we have that prediction, this can be done a year in advance. So you have plenty of time to act and close those gaps. So for example, if we had looked at the closer hub, which may not have had similar stock levels, you could have seen that there was shortage. But again, that's about being able to integrate further detail, further data sets from wider stakeholders. Now, we took the projection into something that we can act upon today. And the context that we looked at was emissions, and we've heard it a few times during the session today. Being able to take those models, predict the demand in that particular emergency, we were able to then calculate the emissions associated with any waybill. Based on the prediction, we were then able to associate how many emissions would be allocated for each item. Given the data we've already got, we've been able to show exactly what emissions have been allocated to each partner agency and down to each region or country. Now, this gives us 4 quick opportunities. And the actions that we can follow right now is basically we can start very quickly and transparently report emissions associated with the logistics element of this humanitarian activity. This can be done at each hub where we get data. Obviously, then when you have those data sets and we're able to then build the trends, we can see whether a hub is becoming more or less efficient, a supplier is becoming more or less efficient, and then we can start giving insight as to where you may be able to reduce emissions. And that's important to all the stakeholders, because at the end of the day, what we're looking at in this context is improving the sustainability long-term of that humanitarian aid. And so then the last part here is to be able to then share partner agencies allocations to be able to actually avoid or abate those emissions. So again, very similar to what you've talked about in the humanitarian context, this is kind of drilling down into the emissions space. Of course, the projection can be applied in any context, given what the stakeholders are asking for. Now, if we look down at specific products, just as an example, on the left-hand side, you have the average emissions for all waybills that are associated to each product item. Now, this is for the last 4 years. And obviously, this gives you the opportunity to identify long-term sustainability indicators. So if this in the next 4 years goes up or down for a specific product, this is an opportunity for us to go back and give advice to the stakeholders to be able to reduce or improve this. Again, on the right-hand side, you have the last 12 months worth of emissions based on each of the partner agencies. So again, being able to quickly give that to the agencies who all have their own efforts to monitor, manage, and reduce their emissions, this is really valuable information for them. But of course, we talked about connecting systems. So being able to take the current systems and take this data and feed it back to the actors, it's a great opportunity to reduce emissions. And again, this can be built for many different spaces and contexts. If you look again, to be able to share the emissions associated with waybills from a specific country, a lot of this, we expect this given the size of shipments. But also when you look at destinations, you can look at whether these trends are going up or trends are going down. Are the efficiencies going up or down? And this is an opportunity to improve sustainability immediately, but obviously for the long term. So again, in terms of what we've heard several times, being able to integrate more and more data sets is really important. Again, we have a bias here from the Dubai, the UAE hub, because that's where the data came from. But as we're able to integrate more and more hubs data sets, we can actually benchmark the emission efficiency of each hub. And that comes down to each hub in terms of items, whether it's a specific item being delivered to a specific destination, or if we want to highlight, as we've already heard about, which is going to be the most cost efficient, we can also talk about it in terms of which is the most efficient in terms of emissions. So there's several upshots for the same data sets, being able to analyze those data sets and feed it back to the right stakeholders. Now, this could be someone in procurement, planning, logistics, or management. It's valuable for different reasons. So it's important that, you know, those conversations continue. But the modeling that we have already is able to give the emissions for a given region. We're able to identify opportunities to reduce emissions through early action because of the projection. And it gives you the opportunity to leverage better, and we've heard this already, but leverage better partnerships. So being able to reach out to specific agencies who have access to aid closer. And again, the way this is possible is by having access to data and effectively sharing it. But also it gives agencies the opportunity to align those forecasts with their budgets in terms of emission reduction, whether it's about abatement or, you know, just changing their actions. And this all comes back to aligning towards a lower carbon future. So looking at the objective of reducing emissions, when we look at the specific context, which was the scenario that was presented, if you look at Madagascar as this example, if we were able to avoid the air freight because of the fact that we were able to project the aid. Now, we've taken the aid for each of these countries, and this is based on the projection that we were able to do, let's say, a year in advance. We can avoid shipping that in an emergency through air freight. You can see the emissions on the left-hand side. We take that and we rather take time, do it via sea freight. You can see that the emissions are lower in orders of magnitude. So that is real impact today. There's no need to wait for that impact. We can see that immediately. Now, of course, when you are more prepared, when you're able to do this in less of an emergency context, you're able to reduce the emissions. But of course, there's other very important impacts, whether it's cost, whether it's, you know, humanitarian aid being where it needs to be. You guys are the experts in this context. So I'm sure the argument for doing the projection is not lost here. What we're doing, what we believe in terms of the impact of this ML and AI, you know, just in this single context, this small project that we're doing, and we're very thankful to be involved in it, you know, we're looking really at promoting resilience. We're being able to deliver water, food, housing, health, social equity, everything. And for us, this is really, really important. And it is a big part of why we are driving this technology, because of the fact we see that these are large global demands. And you know, we believe that it's technologies like this that are needed to be able to meet the large requirements that the world has moving forward. So if there's any questions, we'd be glad to answer.
Thank you for that presentation. That's definitely really interesting. We can see that the potential is massive. I think it's important, I mean, from everything that was presented today and in the last presentation, I think that comes down to two important things. The first thing is to have the data. All those machines and those systems are only as good as the data they're being fed. And I think that in order to access the data, we all need to change our mindset and to take an approach which is a more collaborative approach, which requires more trust, which was also a point mentioned in the discussion this morning. Which also implies that we need to let go, as was written in a very famous report before. We need to let go, and we need to accept of being a bit more dependent from the others. And I think that will take a long time, but I think we're on the right track for that. So before I leave the floor for Q&As, I know we are running late, so sorry for that. Here is the QR code for those who wouldn't have had time to fill that up. And I just would like to take a few questions, if any. Do we have any in the chat, Sophia? For either for the presentation that was just done by nybl or for the general presentation?
Yes, there was a question on the HS codes. In two parts. Number one, are field disaster assessors happy and able to use HS codes? Are they sufficiently granular to identify all relief goods? And the second part is asking if the fact that Stockholm, the humanitarian city, and Azirek appear to have the 6-digit HS and Madagascar's were showing 8 digits. So are the customs prepared to use the 6-digit for simplified declarations? I hope that's clear. I can repeat part of it if not.
It said Chinese to me, but I'm sure Kosti will have all the answers to that.
Thank you for the question. There is a need to supply that information. It's not that HS6 is sufficient or not. It's required by customs legislation, at least for pre-departure and pre-arrival information, but also for simplifications as we proposed here. And we proposed several types of simplification. One is using customs declaration with a reduced data set. It's around 1/3 of the data elements that are normally required by customs, but also using a commodity code at 6-digit level. So I would say I would make a parallel with what happens today, and there is a trend in e-commerce now to use what they call super reduced data set and an HS code, which is common at the international level, so 6-digit code. Is it sufficient enough to declare the goods? In times of emergency, I would say yes. It's very accurate, of course not. This is also the reason why countries are implementing a 10 or 11-digit code. However, the combination of a product ID and the HS code would be sufficient to create this kind of database in which you can uniquely identify those goods. So again, it's part of the simplification process, and it's a requirement to be able to integrate the three systems. And we spoke here about the need to integrate systems, and we highlighted that this integration is not for the benefit of a particular tool. It's bidirectional, yes? So we said that before the emergency is being declared, information from Stockholm is used in Azirek as to see which kind of relief items are being still required. They are not available in the country. That information is made available to IHC database. And vice versa. Once a movement starts from IHC, is being reused in Azirek during the clearance process, but also upon completion of the clearance process, the information from Azirek is passed back to Stockholm, because from the entry point, from the clearance point, the goods are moving into the respective distribution warehouses, national, regional, or local ones. So we have to use a unique identifier for the respective relief items. And the most appropriate one is the HS code today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy, for that. Was there anything else, Sophia?
Yes, just a comment by Zarina. I don't know if she's still with us, but the comment has been partly addressed by Colonel Fali. She was highlighting that the tools are pretty good and useful. However, without NDMO engagement in data sharing and the sense of responsibility and ownership, the tools cannot be socialized. So I just wanted to highlight that. And maybe one more question from Katarina. I also don't know if she's still with us because we are a little bit late, but I'm still going to read it out. If we are planning to add the disaster forecasting and the Stockholm platform, if we already know how are we going to do that, and for example, if one of the plan is to link it to the Inform modules. So these are the two questions for now.
Okay, so the answer is no. We are not planning to integrate the forecast in the Stockholm platform. The approach we have is that we filling the information on one specific gap, which was what is the stock available at country level. There's plenty of others, including Martin, the LogAI platform, or what others are doing that much better than we do. So we will rely on them. That's part of the trust and the collaboration aspect. We will share the data we have with them for them to do this analysis and do this forecasting model, etc. So when it comes to Stockholm, we will continue exclusively focusing on mapping the stock available at national level. We won't map the transport. LogAI is doing that, so we can integrate. We won't map the port or the airport. They're doing that with the LCA. We can integrate. We don't need to overload our platform for that. And similarly for the forecast and projection of disaster, we've seen existing models that are being put in place or others that are thinking about it. So we will integrate what we have with what others are better than us at developing rather than duplicating. Okay. It's starting being late, so I'm just going to leave the floor for last word to Colonel Fali, and then that's it? Okay, so Colonel Fali, I leave the floor to you for closing the session, if you have any last remarks, and I take the opportunity to thank all of you for coming to the session today, attending online. And of course, you are much welcome to contact any of us after that for any follow-up or question. Colonel Fali, I leave it the closing to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Florent, for giving me the floor. And once again, a very thank you and warm thank you for all the presentators and all the attendees of this meeting. It was very enriching sharing information. I hope that all of the proposition, all of the ideas that has been explained and exposed, presented by all of the presenters, all of the question also of the participant can be taken into consideration and will be, as one of the colleagues said, going from words to action. So as part of the National Disaster Management Authority here in Madagascar, we are really very thankful for all of this. And we are open to be part of the next step. So one of the next steps that we can propose to you is to organize a bilateral or multilateral meeting in which we can see all together how can move forward also for this in Madagascar. And by taking into consideration all the steps of advocacies and then authorization from your side. But in any case, thank you very much. And on behalf of our General Director of BNGSA here, I would like really to say to you, if it's possible, to come to Madagascar to implement some of the steps so that we can make it real, that next year we can really present something very ongoing in the next rendezvous in Geneva. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. We'll leave it here. Thank you, everyone.